welcome back, everybody. If you could find a seat, please, that would be great, so my illustrious panel can get going. I'm here purely to do a bit of air hostessing in terms of, things that you should know about the flight today. One is that there is a form on your table in which we are asking for your feedback. It's an analog form, I know. We've gone very vintage, but so we can see you, we can watch you, we know if you've done it. Please do fill it in. We want your feedback, even in this analog form. So please do that at some point during the morning. The final thing I just wanted to say was there's been a couple of people have asked whether or not the Moral Maze session is just is part of the summit or is just an exclusive event. It is part of the summit. It's the last session of the day. It is a recording that will go out later in April as a Moral Maze episode, and you are the audience. So please don't believe that's not for you. It's an exciting difference for the summit, so everybody's welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Thea. So across high-income countries, primary care is experiencing very similar pressures around the ageing and increasingly sick and complex patients that they're seeing, challenges to the workforce about participation, real issues in many rural and coastal areas, and a general feeling of being under pressure. And we're seeing similar sorts of responses, more multidisciplinary practice and larger teams. In the academic literature, ownership is seen as a second-order issue. It's probably not that important. But that's from a policy perspective. It's not necessarily true for the people who actually inhabit the different ownership approaches. For them, it's really important in terms of how much autonomy and agency they have, which we know are factors which are absolutely crucial in motivation and avoiding burnout, and also in terms of how you manage your own workflow, which we know from the Whitehall study is actually a pretty good predictor of your morbidity and mortality. So ownership really probably does matter to the people who are in it, which is why we're going to explore a really contentious and interesting bit of the ownership debate, which is the partnership model the right way of thinking about the way that general practice works in the future? And to do this, I've got a great array of talent. We're going to hear from Becks Fisher, who's the Director of Research and Policy at the Nuffield Trust, who's going to set the scene for us. And then we have a panel. We have Kate. I'll go down the panel. I've got Liam Loftus, who is a GP, but also the Assistant Director of Policy and Practice Engagement at the Health Equity and Evidence Centre. I hope I got that right. So you're going to need a bigger business card, I think. It's very good. And then we have Katie Bramall-Stainer, who is the chair of the GPC, the BMA. And then at the end, we have Richard Foggett, who is the founder and director of Future Health. And they're going to respond to Becks, who is now going to take us through some of the issues.
Nigel, thank you. Hello, everybody. For full disclosure of interest, I feel like I ought to say I'm also a salaried GP. The future of the partnership model might seem like a fairly policy wonkish question. This is a conversation I have been so excited to have. It's one that I don't think I have seen happen in a forum like this in my career in general practice, I think for good reason. As Nigel says, it's been very contentious. Definitely, perhaps not in policy circles, but within the profession. I'm not asked what do I think about the partnership model. I'm usually asked what do I believe about it, which I think is an interesting turn of phrase. And this is an era where resisting that polarization, bringing nuance into conversation and opening difficult discussions feels particularly important. So thank you for joining us today. And thank you to the panel who have agreed to have what I think is quite a brave conversation. I'm going to do a bit of a setup job here. I'm aware that living and breathing ownership models of general practice may not be everybody's bread and butter. And so I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes just talking about what partnership is. I want to take you through some pretty graphs my colleague Paul has helped with that will just show you some workforce trends in general practice over the past decade or so. And then I'm going to just set out some of the challenges and benefits of the partnership model as often litigated, just so that as a panel we don't spend our time relitigating those. We can move on to, I think, the more interesting conversation of what the future of the model is and how do we deliver really high quality general practice into the future of the NHS. So what is the partnership model? Well, as if you weren't interested enough already, it's a legal structure. It's fundamentally a business model. GP partnerships are independent, autonomous businesses. GP partners hold contracts, now through ICBs, but really with NHS England, to deliver GP services to the populations on their lists, according to the contractual specifications that they sign up to. Within partnerships, there will be an internal partnership in the practice which sets out the terms and conditions between the GP partners, and that's actually quite a flexible structure. So you can have completely flat hierarchies within practices, you can have managing partners, lead partners, whole range of different arrangements. But the important thing to understand is that the partnership model is effectively GPs as businesses. And so what that really means is that alongside their clinical work, GP partners are doing all of the work associated with running a business. They're employing staff, they're doing admin, they are sorting out their technology, the whole show. And as you would expect, along with those, it's a risk-reward relationship. So GP partners take a share of profit, of gain from the surgery, but in return for that, they take a lot of risk. So most GP partnerships in England are unlimited liability, which means partners bear the financial responsibility for debts and losses associated with the practice. So very much a risk-reward relationship. I want to talk now about what's happened over the last decade in partner numbers in this country. And just to orientate you to the graph slightly, what you're looking at here is on the x-axis trend over time, so that's September 2015 on the far left-hand side, over to December 2000 last year on the right-hand side. You're looking at headcount of partner numbers on the y-axis, and the thing I want you to focus on is the big green chunk at the bottom, that's GP partner numbers. And what you're seeing is that the headcount of GP partners has declined pretty steadily over that period. So it's about a 25% decrease. Back in September 2015, there were 24,500 or so GP partners. Now that's down to 18,400. So big decrease there. And the chunk in blue in the middle is the trend in salaried GP numbers. So big increase, that's an 80% increase, up from just over 10,000 to more like 18,000. So that, I think, is the first important graph I want you to just picture for a couple of minutes. This is what it looks like as a proportion of the GP workforce. So two pie charts here. September 2015, December 2024, and you'll see that there's a significant swing. That green is partnership. So 68% of the GP workforce back in 2015 were GP partners. As of June last year, GP partners are in the minority. So that is, I think, a fairly significant trend. And I've already said that GP partners really own and manage GP surgeries. So as you might expect, as the number of GP partners has fallen, so too has the number of GP surgeries. So from about 7,600 back in September 2015 to just over 6,000 now. So that's a drop of almost 20% in that time. This, though, is, for me at least, the graph that I think is kind of the reason why I really wanted to bring this conversation to our group today. What you're looking at here is a graph that shows the age profile of GP partners. So again, just to orientate you, over on the x-axis, that's age. So on the left, younger GPs, to the right, older GPs. The y-axis is percentage change. 0 is quite high up on the graph. And what you're seeing is that, pretty obviously, the number of young GP partners has fallen very significantly over time. So that's a 53% drop over this time period from September 2015 to December last year. And that data, which comes from NHS Digital, tallies pretty neatly with survey data, which has consistently shown that early career GPs and GP trainees no longer aspire to partnership in their careers, certainly not in the way that previous generations of GPs have done. That's the data, I think, that really forms the backdrop to the conversation we're having today. And I just wanted to briefly, though, orientate you to some of the, I guess arguments probably is a reasonable term to use here, that have been used to set up the benefits and challenges of the partnership model. it clearly has many strengths. It's often viewed as very cost effective. The argument is that GP partners have a very strong incentive to run an efficient service. They often work very long hours, that if we made that service entirely salaried, it would be very expensive to pay for. And GP partners have really tight financial discipline. If you think about how much activity happens in general practice, there is no deficit in GP budgets. It's kind of extraordinary. GP partners can take on loans to invest in their business, to invest in premises, for example, or other things, but they're personal non-NHS liabilities. So very tight financial discipline and quite a degree, I would suggest, of financial safeguarding for the system. Partnership makes practices nimble. You often hear about the kind of agility, freedom to innovate that is associated with the partnership model. And it also tends to make GPs stable in place. When I was a GP trainee, someone once said to me, choose your partnership more carefully than you choose your marriage, you might be in it for longer. I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but it is clear that the turnover of GP partners is much lower than the turnover of other parts of the GP workforce. And I think that is associated probably with that stability in place, deep knowledge of communities that historically has allowed GP surgeries to really innovate and try and meet the needs of the populations that they're serving. Partnership is also associated with some challenges. Some of them are around the ideology of the model. Partnership predated the formation of the NHS, but keeping it was one of Bevan's biggest compromises. The high salaries of some GP partners have been very publicly critiqued. And I think, and this is where I stray into some potentially more difficult territory, is that it can be hard to tie value for money to spending in general practice, in part because of the partnership model. And I think this is the legacy, really, of the 2004 GP contract. We may get into this in more detail. Richard, I'm sure you have a perspective on this. But very hard to tie inputs to outputs in general practice, and perhaps a perception that partnership is part of that. That same agility and autonomy that is such a strength of general practice can also be quite a challenge depending on your position in the system. Perhaps if you're a commissioner trying to coordinate what practices are doing across your patch, getting 30 or 50 independent GP partnerships to do the same thing can be a challenge. I'm going to stop reeling through a list here because this isn't a session about litigating the pros and cons of partnership. It's a session about what the future of partnership should be. But I just wanted to go through some of those to try and sort of shape the conversation a bit. I'm really grateful to you, Nigel, for talking us through this, but I think we're going to start with actually asking you collectively what you think the future might be.
Yes, thank you. So, let's see, have I got the right slide? So you know the drill net by now, I think. On your tables there is a QR code. You may be able to scan. This one. So I'm going to ask colleagues at the back, do you think it'd be possible to come back to this slide later at the end if we have time? Is that going to be, are you able to, you can, okay. So we might see if opinions change during the, it's always risky that, because this can be quite a contentious issue and people sort of bring their own baggage to it. I think as Becks sort of indicated there, we want to try and explore this in a constructive and thoughtful way rather than litigate some of the sort of rather public battles about this. So, how are we doing? Okay. I'm not sure about putting the vote up as it's happening, whether there's a sort of, I've got that wrong. Okay. All right, so let it wither on the vine is the minority opinion at the moment. Actively move to end the partnership model. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. I think that's probably most votes in, and the bad news for the partnership model as far as this room is concerned is that either actively or passively people probably see the end to it. There's some brave souls on the active end of the spectrum who might want to consider what hill do you want to die on. But let's explore this then. Okay, so thanks for that. If we get a chance, we might come back to that. We'll see if we have the time. So we've got the panel. Let's ask the panel to kind of respond to what they've heard from Becks, and in particular to sort of think about what they think the future of the partnership model is over the next 15 years. And if not the partnership model, then what might replace it? Because looking in other countries, you can make some very big mistakes, particularly if you let private equity into your primary care system. So I think I'll go down the panel this way and start with Liam, and you're a relatively new GP, so I think your perspective will be particularly interesting. So over to you.
Excellent. No, thank you, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Liam. I'm a newly qualified GP. I'm not practicing clinically at the moment, but I think the real reason I'm here this morning is because I've spent a lot of time working with early career GPs and asking them the question, what does a positive future look like for you in general practice, and what steps can we take to get there? And if the question this morning is, well, what does the partnership model look like in 15 years' time? It does really feel like we're sat at quite a crossroads at the moment, where there are two quite clear paths. One is essentially a more of the same path, to continue as we are currently. I think for me, two, the other path would be, is there an opportunity to evolve and adapt how we do things and explore some slightly different ideas? So if we were to take path one, and whether that would exist in 15 years' time if we continue as we are currently, I think the data that Becks presented this morning about the trends, particularly that workforce trend, and particularly the fact that early career GPs aren't becoming partners in the way that they once did, I don't think partnership would be around in 15 years, and certainly not to the scale it is currently. I think path two is then where it gets quite interesting. So when I speak to my generation, the GPs coming through the system, and say, well, what does partnership look like to you? There are so many strengths that they talk about, and some of them Becks has already outlined. They really like the idea of autonomy, of being rooted in a community and being able to shape the services for that community. They really like how dynamic you can be as well. So you can have that idea on Friday afternoon in your practice, and by Monday morning it's up running, you're evaluating it, and off you go. It's really attractive. And I don't think they want to shy away from responsibility or accountability either. I don't think that's the issue here. Quite often the people I speak to say, yes, I do want leadership roles within my practice, within my community, and I'm happy to accept the responsibility and accountability that comes with that. I think where one of the issues comes in, and potentially why we're seeing some of the trends we see at the moment, is that risk-reward balance that Becks has touched upon. When it comes to risk, our generation see a huge amount of risk associated with the partnership model. Firstly, that's personal risk. If you're at the top of a practice as a partner where the buck stops with you, and essentially we're in an almost unlimited workload situation here, then fundamentally that can take a huge toll on your professional life and your personal life. And we see the partners ahead of us who are putting in all hours under the sun just to keep the practice going. That is a bit off-putting. And then secondly, about financial risk as well. If you're a partner, there's an option, there's the potential that your earnings year on year could fluctuate. There's the potential that you might have to buy into a practice and buy into a building in some cases, which is quite a difficult ask for some of our generation when they struggle to buy their own houses. And I think as well, there's something about there's something about how that risk-reward balance looks from their early career at the moment, and how it maybe is slightly different from a generation previously. The reason I lay it out like this is because I think there's actually potential to evolve what we're doing currently. What would a model look like where we try and keep some of those real benefits? We might trade back a bit of the instability, a bit of the risk, and in return get a bit more stability, and hopefully come up with a model that works really well for the profession going forward, that might work slightly better for policymakers going forward, but fundamentally work really well for our patients going forward, because I think that's what a lot in my generation want to see at its heart.
Thanks, Liam. Thank you, Liam. We'll explore this question about where we're evolving to during the course of the conversation, and I think we'll be very interested to hear from the audience here as well later. But let's go to Katie next.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here this morning. I'd just like to ask a really quick question with a show of hands. Put your hands up if you've never worked in a GP setting or never worked in GP commissioning. Yeah, it's the majority. So I think it's really important to identify what problem we're trying to fix here, what problem we're trying to solve. Wes Streeting, a week ago, when we were doing the media round on the potential agreement for a new GP contract, said repeatedly, the NHS in England sees 1.7 million patients every day. 1.5 million of those are in GP surgeries. And we've lost 1 in 4 GP surgeries since 2010. We've lost thousands of GPs. The overall share of the NHS pie has gone from just over 11% in 2007-2008 to now just over 5%. Turns out when you slash something in half, it doesn't feel like a very safe financial bet. And that is what's driving the exodus here. Our activity has increased in terms of our digital change. That is unparalleled across the NHS. We have taken on 35,000 additional roles reimbursement scheme members of different roles in the practice settings. So in terms of those key headlines and metrics that we're often assessed against of transformation, innovation, productivity and efficiency, general practice delivers. We've got the new government stated objectives of going for digital over analogue, and as I keep saying, that feels a little bit gaslighty to us in general practice. We have electronic prescribing, we do all of our referrals electronically, all of our communications are electronic, our new patient forms are electronic, everything is paperless. We've been paperless for donkey's years. And compare and contrast that when you're sat for hours in the discharge lounge waiting for your medication to be produced. Why can't that just be sent to a local pharmacy? Imagine the productivity, imagine the flow through an acute setting if all of those things were realised. So if we're looking at the critical 3 balances of safety, cost and quality, we are trying to spin all of those plates, and we know that it's really difficult. So I think what we have this morning, to be controversial, and absolutely no disrespect to Becks, because I thought this is exactly the conversation we should be having, and that presentation is exactly the data we should be seeing, but this is the wrong question. Because actually it's not necessarily about should partnerships stay or go, it's how do we protect the independent contractor status in general practice, because it's the independent contractor status that delivers on the productivity, the efficiency. It's how we were able to actually buy our own PPE at the start of the pandemic and decide, you know what, we are going to put on masks straight away. It's that agility and that autonomy that delivers, and that's what we have to protect. That's what I am really keen that we've got to bake in. We're having contract discussions, and some of you might be aware that the 25-26 GP contract is contingent upon the Secretary of State writing to me within the next week or so to commit to negotiating a new contract. And the reason for that is because GMS is broken. And I just want to address the big salary question, because it's not a salary when you're a partner, it's drawings, it's what's left in terms of your share around your business costs. Now, we can look at more corporate organisations and those salaries and shareholders and those dividends. Well, they can also be quite surprisingly generous. So these individuals are being castigated and criticised for making GMS work. And actually, I would argue it's danger money, because a partnership is a partnership under the 1890 Partnership Act. That is a very brief, very Victorian, very Wild West piece of legislation that carries unlimited liabilities. No one, anywhere, carries unlimited liabilities apart from GP Partners and Slaughter and May, and it's their USP. We're not allowed to be limited liability partnerships. We're not allowed to be community interest corporations. We're not allowed to have a more formalised board governance structure. But imagine what could be possible if we did. Imagine what security that could provide. And the reason why a new contract is so important is to address that, Because we've heard Keir Starmer say no major investment without major reform. And if we're going to get that 5% change to 15% and more, we're going to need major reform. And to enable that major reform, we have to be able to say to the government, OK, actually, use general practice. Hang the hook of the local neighbourhood NHS around the registered list.
I'm going to ask you if you could answer either this question or the question that you posed, because I feel you're just on the verge of telling us something absolutely brilliant about the next 15 years, which was the question. So could you...
So I'd love to see a new contract where everything's thriving again. When I applied for partnership in 2009, 2010, I had to leave London. I couldn't get a partnership. I was a walking uterus. And so I had to go around the home counties. 85 people applied for my partnership. I'm not a partner anymore. I'm very open. I've got MS. I was very poorly at the start of my disease progress, and I was unsafe to work in the partnership, and I was very exposed in terms of ongoing liabilities and ongoing illness. I'll know we've got somewhere if I feel able and safe to go back into a practice to run it and change something for my population. So we do need to evolve. But actually, the question is, how do we protect the independent contractor status? Because if we're going to be vertically aligned, well, as Andrea Leadsom said to me, why don't you just let the hospitals take over general practice? And I said, well, what deficit have hospitals accrued over the past year? 1.1 billion. And what deficit has general practice accrued? 0. So actually, this is what I want us to think about. How do we protect? Don't be threatened by the autonomy of general practice. Let's look and see how we can mature it to be fit for the 21st century and fit for GPs to come. But we've got to protect those GPs we have, because they are the linchpins of community and provision and stability. And the premises thing, I think, goes in lockstep. That goes in lockstep, because the GP partners of the future, the GPs that run the services, they are now qualifying in tens of thousands of debt. They can't get on the housing ladder themselves. This is what we have to unlock, and this is what we have to address. But partnership is not the bogeyman. Partnership has been decimated in terms of the resource that's been attached to it. So why wouldn't you leave if the government has committed to eradicating it by the end of the decade, as the Policy Exchange and Sajid Javid said? And at that point, I'll hand over to Richard.
Thank you. I'm glad that Andrea Leadsom was showing typical perspicacity and insight, so that's encouraging. It's very consistent. Richard.
Nigel, thank you. I've never seen a poll like that at one of these conferences. I've never seen a poll response like that. Usually you get quite an anodyne question and everyone kind of broadly agrees, and then you get a few more people agree by the end. Never seen such a kind of... that was not the response I was expecting. And I'm really interested to see if it sticks through the rest of the conversation. But the question probably is, why is there that level of response? And if you just indulge me, I'll just read a couple of quotes from some very senior figures. As the contractor model declines in some communities, we won't let patients go without the care they need. We'll bring fragmented services together, make sure salaried GPs serve all communities, and we'll modernise the appointment system. Second quote, separate person. Keeping GPs separate from the rest of the NHS is an impediment to reorganising care to meet today's needs. Offering GPs a right to NHS employment would be a big step forward. Third quote, on the GP contract, if you've got really good GPs, you can work with the contract. If you've not got good GPs, it's really hard. Final quote. The truth is, the way that GP practices operate financially is a murky and opaque business. I'm not sure what people can honestly say exactly how the money is spent or where it goes. And from my point of view, as someone who wants to be a custodian of the public finances as Health Secretary, that would not be a tolerable situation. Those 4 quotes are from the following. The Prime Minister, Aradazai, Penny Dash, and Wes Streeting. So one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because senior people in the system have told us we need to have this conversation. And when you posed your question of what's the next 15 years look like, I thought, goodness me. Because if you go back 15 years and we were having this conversation here, the Health Secretary was Andy Burnham. We were talking about a national care service, and you could get a GP appointment within 48 hours. So if you'd have said, well, what does the next 15 years like, we wouldn't have come to this kind of conclusion. So it's a very, very, very difficult question to answer. I think the reason we're having the conversation is not only because senior political and policy leaders seem to want to have this conversation, it's also because there are 2 things happening here. One is the public says that GP access is the most important thing to them right now. The Mori Health Foundation data that came out a week ago had GP access as the top issue for patients, 38%. It was then A&E with 33%, and then it was electives in 27%. Now, what is going on with health policy at the moment? The number one priority is electives, and it has been electives for a long time. I mean, in the last 5 years, we've pretty much spent the whole of health policy discussions talking about one number. Is it 7.7? Is it 7.6? Is it 7.5? Is it going up? Has the Prime Minister broken his pledge? This is a really, really dull conversation to have. And it's not actually the conversation that the public really wants to have either, because as Katie rightly knows, most care is done in primary care. Yeah. Millions and millions of people see people in primary care every single day, and yet the focus of the health system is on a specific part of it. And that disconnect is something that fundamentally, through whatever reform process we want, a journey we want to go on, needs to be fixed and needs to be solved. And part of that is to do with the fact that the system, which is still a highly centralised, highly politically driven system, really struggles with the GP independent contractor model because it can't control it. Yeah. And the reason why you've got things like ARRS and the PCN-DES and all of these other things is because the Treasury says, after 2004, we're not giving the GPs any more money to do what they want to do. We'll give them money, but it has to be done like this. And that is a really bad way to do public policy. Yeah. It's a really bad way to do policy. It's so top-down, it's so centralised, and it doesn't work. And the other side of this is, the other reason we're having this conversation is, on the reform agenda, the reform agenda goes through primary care. The 3 shifts are all about primary care. If you don't have a functioning primary care system, you can't do any of this. And if you look at that polling, you can't do C. You can't actively end the partnership model because the system would go bust. Literally. So you can't actively. The current policy is B. Becks's graphs are B. It's wither on the vine. That's been the active policy for 10, 15 years. And yes, I think Liam makes some very good points about the changing dynamics of younger career GPs and their different views on how they want to act, and societal changes and dynamics. And primary care is not an island here. It's operating in a very, very challenging fiscal situation. We've got record high levels of illness, whether that's on public health side, and then what on earth we're doing. And then I know there's some social care people in the audience. There's no social care plan here, and an active social care system needs to work alongside a primary care system. So I sort of feel like the conversation on the partnership model is important, but it's not really, at this stage of the health policy reform agenda, is not really the kind of big picture question we need to be having, which is, what do we want our health system to do? What does a good primary care system look like? How do we fund that? And how does it work with other parts of the system? Final point is on the deficits point. You'll never move money if one bit of the system is racking up a big deficit. HSJ yesterday says it's 6.6 billion, the plans that have been submitted. I mean, planning in the NHS is broken. It's a fantasy.
Did it ever work?
Well, that's a very good question, as we're about to write a 10-year plan. So there is no point in saying we're going to move money from one bit of the system to another part of the system unless there is an equity between those two systems of how they are assessed. You cannot keep bailing out one bit of the system and expect another bit of the system to break even. It just doesn't work. So this is an important topic, partnership, but actually there's a much bigger question about the future and dynamics of primary care, which if we don't get the next 6-12 months right, we're in big trouble.
Great, thanks, Richard. I'm not going to object to the fact that the panellists have every one of them has slightly reframed the question. Actually, it's been actually very helpful, and I think opens up some interesting channels about how do we basically, I might summarise it, is how do we have our cake and eat it? How do we get the benefits of autonomy and mastery and control that motivates people and allows you to be agile and meet the needs of your community, but how do you do it in a way that integrates properly with the rest of the system, supports the move towards more neighbourhood type working, and is better integrated. And I really like the financial point at the end there, Richard. Thank you. Becks, do you want to just come in on and reflect on some of that, and maybe
nail my colours to the mast on the 15-year question?
Yes, well, you could answer the question. It would be a radical move.
I'll leave you to judge that, Nigel. Okay, here's my go. I don't think that partnership will be the dominant model in 15 years' time. I think there are two reasons for my views. One is that graph I showed you on the age distribution, really, and Liam has spoken very eloquently to this, but is the change in the generational perspective on wanting to become a partner. There is a legitimate question on that, which is if you change the inputs to if you change the conditions around partnership, if you pump money into general practice, if you fix estates, if you take problems with leases out of estates, if you allow partnership to become limited, not unlimited liability, can you change that dynamic? Would early career GPs change their minds? My concern is that the financial challenges that Richard, you've spoken to, will limit our investment into the system under the partnership model. So in a way, the thing that is needed to save partnership, i.e. significant investment, in my view, is made much harder because of the model itself. And I think the paper I've never written, you'll all be very grateful for this, is the long shadow of the 2004 GP contract. Like, I really, well, you can be my one reader. Thanks. Thanks, team. I really, it was a colossal breach of trust, I think, between Treasury and the profession. And that, for me, I think, is the biggest single reason why I don't think that partnership will be the dominant model in 15 years' time. What would I do right now? I absolutely wouldn't rip it up. There are places where partnership is working really well. Nigel Watson's 2019 GP review of the partnership model, I think, is notable in many respects. One of them is that nothing happened as far as I could work out as a follow-up to it. So he has lots of recommendations in it that weren't really actioned. There are things you can do to shore up partnership. I don't think that will be enough, and I think now is the time to more actively, right, Richard, there is a active wither on the vine. Personally, I would change that. I would say we need to actively plan for alternatives to the partnership model. That's a conversation I hope that we could have. Lots of different ways to do that. I think three steps that I would take. One, back to your point, Richard, and Katie, I think you made this as well. What do we want general practice to be for? What is the purpose of general practice in the English NHS now? Let's work on that basis. Then let's think about the operational models that support that. Forget contracts for a second, think about what the operational models are. What is our relationship to scale? How are we going to deliver continuity in communities? Work that out. And I actually think that the contracting part is the third order bit of the question. It is quite existential. I've gone slightly more micro than you, Richard, but I think those are really big questions for general practice. My view is that for too long, this has just been left to innovative GPs and the market to sort out. I think there are real risks. That's working very well in some places as well, but there are real risks attached to that. So my view is support partnership, but also actively develop a plurality of models, understand where they work best and what is best for different local communities, and start working towards that rather than just letting things wither.
Can I just pick up the LLP point? Because other professions that have had partnerships have classically moved to LLP-based models. So, because having unlimited liability really is a big ask for anyone. Why not?
Good question, and one you need to put to NHS England.
Okay.
And I think that because it's to do with the pension rules. Yeah. So you're not able to, if you wish to, I mean, they might say you can have any model you like, but you're only going to be able to access the NHS pension scheme for your staff if you're a traditional partnership model carrying unlimited liability.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like...
It's not
like VAT
well,
or some of these other rules where you can't change them. That sounds like one that's in someone's gift. And the other question, the lack of trust of the Treasury. I mean, one solution that you see in other industries is open book accounting. So, if I give you money, I can tie everything to in ours roles and make sure you don't, go and buy a Lexus. Or I could just get me to show you your books. I mean, that's another option you see again in other...
That happens. Yeah. That happens at a system level. Yeah. I mean, I'm Chief Executive for Cambridgeshire Local Medical Committee, and we've sorted out many issues for particular practices through an open book approach. And I think there's that suspicion that people are raking it in, and actually when they see the books, they go, oh, actually, no, you're not.
Well, we've had a long history of contracting for the worst, rather than to try and encourage intervention.
It's that lack of trust.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we might see if some of the audience would like to have a go at answering the question. We always come to you first, Sam. We're not going to this time. I will come to you. I'm going to go to Mina, who is operating a big partnership model. say who you are,
thank you.
Meena, and
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you. My name is Meena Gupta, and I'm a Group Clinical Chair for Modality Partnership, and we are actually a full-blown partnership. We have no investment from any US companies or anything along those lines. We operate under the partnership model. And we have 135 partners, and this year we have appointed 19 new partners, all from the age of 30 to 40. Now, the reason that I think we've been successful in doing this is by doing exactly what Liam has said, is we have listened to our partners to understand what their worries are about partnership. So this is literally just about the partnership model itself. For us, it is working because we have been able to deal with the property issues, with the fact that the business does require, as all businesses do, a level of operating capital. And everybody needs to put that operating capital in. By dint of being bigger, we have a bigger pool, so our partners don't need to have quite so much as they start. They can build up their operating capital. So we've put a lot of structures in place to help people do this. And I think that the people coming into our partnership really enjoy the autonomy and the privilege they have of being a GP partner. But I do understand that partnership overall in the whole country is falling, and that we do need to think about other models. The unique thing about general practice is that lots of different models do work, and so you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, well, let partnership wither on the vine. I think there is a very strong case for keeping it going and supporting it, but it does need to be supported by the Department of Health in lots of different ways, as was mentioned in Nigel Watson's report, particularly this business of LLP. Unlimited liability does scare people, and in my role, I spend a lot of time talking to the partners about what does that mean and how do you protect yourself from it.
Great, thanks, Meena. I think we'll take three. We'll do three now, and then I'll get the panel to respond. But to go to Martin, then I will go to Sam, and then Rima there. Yeah.
Thanks, Nigel. Martin Marshall, Chair of the Trust and retired GP, but never an ex-GP. I was on that hill of we need to invest in the partnership model, but I've no intention of dying on it, Nigel.
No, that wasn't the hill that they're going to die on. It was the other one.
Maybe. For the simple reason that I see the decline in the proportion of doctors who want to be partners, not as a bad thing, but as a good thing. Because it seems to me that in order to be a partner, what you've got to do is have the skills and the commitment to be a really good manager, a really good leader, good at developing businesses, good at strategy, all the kind of things that most of us as clinicians are not trained to do and actually aren't very good at. So what we need is a proportion of GPs to be partners for all the reasons that people have described, but maybe that proportion could be 15 or 20%. And it doesn't matter that it's very different from when I became a partner in 1990, when somewhere between 90 and 95% of GPs were partners.
Yeah, great. Sam?
Sam Everington, GP. Access is actually up 20% since pre-COVID days, so it's really fascinating. Access is a great complaint, but 30 million consultations in England every month, that's the equivalent of half the population. So there's a disconnect, actually. And your issue about the elective, well, actually, we've got the solution, because we caused the problem. I refer people, so I'm the problem. So what did we do in Tower Hamlets? And Katie has taken this contract in Tower Hamlets and made it national. Advice and guidance, response from specialists within 1 week, not languishing for months on the waiting list. There is a trust in this country that took on a general practice. It's just handing back the contract. It had a budget of 14 million. It went 7 million over budget. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I had a look at this. Most of the trusts who've taken on GMS practices have had to make very significant investments in them. They've also had the problem that they have to bring many of the staff onto Agenda for Change, which is a significant challenge in a number of cases. So, yeah. And, I'm going to encourage you to answer the question or give you... I'm really doing very badly on this, so help me out. Yeah?
My answer will come at the end, but it's complex, as people have clearly isolated.
But if you can be relatively brief as well. I know what you like, Sam, so we really want to hear from you. So,
I will speak very quickly then.
Go on.
So 7 years ago, no pay, 5 months. That's the consequences of getting the budgets wrong in general practice. You have real accountability. But every time I post in Health Service Journal comments, Why are people spending money they haven't got? 50% dislikes. The problem actually, and I would pose it to the audience here, is actually the rest of the system is completely undisciplined and bankrupting the thing. And finally, so some solutions going forward of the models. One of our partners, full profit sharing, is a nurse. The partnership shouldn't just be GPs. You need to have a wider skill set, practice managers, finance, etc. What about the social enterprise as a model to deal with the list?
Yeah.
But actually, finally, I wanted to land on the final point. Nobody's mentioned the important patients in all of this. Actually, the Norwegian study, where I come from, proudly, shows continuity of care is absolutely critical, both in terms of relationships with patients, but guess what? Picking up serious illness. And if you want continuity of care, you do want a GP for life. Yes, not necessarily partnership, that's one of the models. And you do want somebody who feels a real ownership in the process. So be careful what you want with. And if people go down the pathway of destroying it, it's going to cost them a fortune.
Yeah, absolutely. Rima, yeah. And then we'll get some responses and I'll take another 3.
Hi, I'm Rima McCareham. I currently chair Somerset Foundation Trust, which runs basically almost the whole of the NHS in Somerset, including a quarter of the GP practices. And before that, I was chairing an ICB. And I think there's an elephant in the room that's just not being addressed. I don't care how GPs organise themselves, if it works for them, whichever way. That is, I totally agree, it's the wrong question. But I'm all about population health, inequalities, prevention, doing things differently. That's not going to happen in the acutes. It's not going to happen in community health. It starts actually possibly even before the GP's front door, but the GPs are linchpins in the community to bring it all together to do that piece. The elephant in the room is that we're talking about the innovative GPs, those who really do something different, great. I want to keep those GPs. But I'm thinking about the GPs that really are not those people who you give them a new building, you put 2 GP practices in, they won't work together, they have to have their own receptionists. They're not grateful for the fact that you've actually built them a building, and they don't show up to work. And the current contract does not allow you to manage those kind of GPs, doesn't allow you to get them onto that journey of innovation and population health. So there's a problem with the contract in terms of performance management. But even worse, when I'm sitting where I'm sitting and I'm saying, well, what outcomes are we getting in GP practices? What does it feel like for the patients? And I'm not talking about access, I am talking about population health. The only metrics we have is how quickly are the phones being answered, and can patients get an appointment when they get through, and that's it. And so there is, whereas, as we know, acutes, the number of performance targets go into 90, 100 pages, which is definitely the other extreme. So for me, 15 years' time, I would like a contract that allows us to have that continuous improvement conversation with primary care, linking everybody into the holistic pathway that we're all striving to get to, and understanding where the blockages are at primary care, because we've got the data that helps us support primary care but also work with them. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you very much. Let's get responses. Do you want to pick any of those 3 up? Don't have to respond to all 3 of them, but what caught your eye?
I'll try and respond to Mina, Martin and Rima in one short response. Some of the happiest and most fulfilled early career GPs I speak to call themselves partners. I'm like, oh, tell me more. Oh, I'm an associate partner. Oh, fantastic, tell me more. What does that look like in practice? So I'm part of the partnership team. I have the leadership responsibilities that partners do. But I have a set income each year. I have a base salary that gives me stability. It allows me to get my mortgage, pay my bills, etc. And also still able to have sort of incentive type payments as well that are decided by the partnership. So there is that drive to go above and beyond, but in a more sort of stable model. I think that presents an opportunity. So there are lots of innovative practices doing this already. How can we take some of those innovations to other practices, but also presents a challenge as well? So that model only works when there's senior partners who are willing to offer those associate partnerships and take on all of the risk, etc., that our generation aren't so keen to take on. So I think a bit of a challenge, but also a bit of an opportunity as well.
But hang on, isn't that limited income for unlimited liability? I would argue that that's actually, I wouldn't want to, in my LMC role, I see that and I try and call that out. Okay. And I go, why are you shutting the door on a full partnership share? There's the route to parity in partnership, which should describe that, where you want to have your instalments and an equitable route in. But actually, if these guys are on the contract, they are jointly and severally liable for that contract, but they're receiving limited profit share, and I don't support that.
So it'd be a very good question to see whether they do sit on the contract or they're partner in name only.
Exactly, it's a paradox, isn't it?
Indeed, but the things that are so attractive are the ability to still shape services, the ability to have stability without the huge risk that comes from being a part. I mean, they're the happiest partners that I speak to, and I think that says a lot to me.
I mean, we want to get to a point where you don't actually have to have unlimited liability exercised. I mean, that would be an ideal position. Katie, come to you. Responses to the first 4 questions. And I'm going to ask the panelists to be relatively brief because I'd like to get another round in if we could. Yeah.
Absolutely. I wrote our manifesto last summer. It's called Patients First, Why General Practice is Broken and How You Fix It. And in it, I describe a patient-GP ratio of 1 to 1,000. And you might think that's insane. It's not. Denmark switched everything on its head. Norway's figures are like 1 to 1,200. Imagine the preventative population approach you could take if you had that degree of continuity. Continuity is discussed around how it's so important for multi-morbid, complex presentations. No. Continuity benefits everybody. Everyone stands to benefit from it because it's trust and we are human. And AI is going to have its limits because we don't come in with a perfect medical presenting complaint. We come in with nonsense. We come in with denial. And people are going to want me to examine their big toe before I'm allowed to examine their cock because that we're human and that's how it works. They want to try us out. They want to see if we get on. And you only get that level of continuity when you're wrapped into the community. You know who brought you up. You know where you're living. You understand that, and you're going to get that only, that lack of churn with an independent contractor status, because we see huge churn and huge variety and movement in an employment setting. So I think we need to try and capture what works and refine it to be able to keep general practice, because if we screw the gatekeeper, we screw the NHS. And that is what has happened over the past decade.
Richard.
Yeah, just a quick point. I think again, how you write a national contract when you're delivering a mixed modal model is really, really difficult. I think there's a genuine acceptance that if models work in a particular locality for a particular population, you just leave them be. But then how do you write a national contract that actually enables that to happen? And that's the really difficult policy question, I think. And it'd be really interesting to see what the response to the BMA's call for a new contract is. I can imagine that the government will have to say, yes, we will do a new contract because they want to get past this current, collective action and everything else. But then the real question is, what will the government do about that and how will it approach that contract negotiation? And if you go back 2 years, suddenly we saw Wes Streeting being quite bullish about taking on the contract and making some big changes. I don't see that now. I think actually what you're more likely to see, I think Katie's got a much better hand, frankly, than the government has. This government is, like the last one, has lost popularity quite quickly and it doesn't have a lot of money. So from the opening up a new contractual discussion is pretty risky. And so how that plays out and it aligns to that 10-year plan journey on those 3 shifts is, I think, absolutely critical. But I think that there's been a shift in tone based on the political situation at the very, very top.
Do you need a national contract as opposed to a library of contractual mechanisms?
This is a great question. It's a great question because, again, what we've got is we've got a GP contract, a pharmacy contract. Do you need a different approach completely? And by asking for, and the call's got in, we want a new contract. GMS doesn't work. It's come from over there. It's come from here. Okay, then. Do we have to start from the same place, or do we start from somewhere very, very different based on, again, where we want to go? So, and that is a huge political decision that you have to make.
Leave it hanging. because I want to get everyone in. Oh, my goodness. Okay. Questioners, to be really brief, I'm going to go. I've got Nick, Naomi, and I can't. I can't. Oh, Nish. Yeah, and then the gentleman here with his very tall hand up. Yeah, I can't see who it is, but yeah.
Nick Black, London School of Hygiene. Until Sam's final point, you'd be forgiven for thinking that general practice was about general practitioners. They are a minority of the workforce. What I'm longing to hear, before I could have a view on this question, is the views of the majority of staff working in general practice. What do the practice nurses think about this? We haven't heard a word about that. What about all the other staff working there? Come on, wake up. It's 2025. You know, general practice is multidisciplinary, multi-professional.
Good, very good. Naomi, to pass the mic back to Naomi. Say who you are, of course, Naomi.
Naomi Fulop, UCL. So just to support I'm in the agnostic camp of which model. The key question, as Rima said, is how do we get high quality primary care that, as you said, Nigel, is integrated with the rest of the system? What kind of workforce model do we need? I'd like to hear from the panel, building on Nick's points. And it would be good to have a bit more evidence in this discussion. So, for example, what evidence do we have that salaried GPs move around more? And consultants are salaried, and we know that they tend to stick around. And the other piece of evidence is that, but Katie did allude to it, on the risk-benefit balance, is that independent contractors have an NHS pension. And that's the fun fact I use at dinner parties to non-NHS people who work in the real world, who are quite shocked to find out the business owners have an NHS pension. Thank you.
And occupational health as well, of course.
No, we don't have
Oh, no. Oh, no, you don't. No. They were going to do it.
Things I've asked for.
Sorry? I will be quick. I'm wrong. Yep.
I'm Nish Manek. I'm an early career GP in Cambridge and also run a national leadership programme called Next Generation GP, which Liam and Becks have helped with. And just an observation from the interaction I've had with loads of early career GPs over the last few years is that I wonder if people don't necessarily want to be a partner straight out of training, but they do want it just a lot later on. And I wonder if that's partly reflective of other trends in society. So people are getting married later, buying houses later, having children later. And the observation I've had is people are not saying no, they're just saying not yet. And I actually agree with Martin that perhaps we could then use this as an opportunity to give people the skills that they need to become partners out of training over the next 5-10 years as they progress through their careers. And they might aspire to partnership later, but we invest in them early. But I think it's partly maybe reflective of some of the trends we're seeing in other parts of society.
Thank you. Very quick last point, and then I'm going to ask the panel to give me one last thought, and we'll end with Becks, and then we'll put the while we're doing that, perhaps we could put the Mentimeter question up again, if we could, and see whether there's been any.
Thank you. My name's Luke Allen. I'm from the University of Oxford, where I co-direct global primary care. I'm a salaried GP at a limited liability company. It was a partnership, it moved to limited liability in Oxford. Seems to work all right for them. They do get pensions. I don't really know how that works.
Perhaps you better go and check.
For me, this is all about not partnership, but the independent contractor status. And the central issue, I think, is about control, so about autonomy and power. And my last question was going to be, for the future, I don't really care what the model is, but how do you get that balance between being agile and innovative whilst managing underperformance?
Yeah. So there's another tension there. Very quickly, might want to respond to Nick's point about workforce, the slight absence of evidence. But you've got about 30 seconds to do it each. So because very poor chairmanship has been in evidence here, and I failed to control the time. So Richard, we'll come down the line here.
Yeah, I mean the challenge between being agile and innovative and being told what to do, essentially, is a classic national local policy challenge. When I was thinking about where we are in the kind of journey. I was reading the Nuffield Trust website, actually, before coming here. It was very good. Lots of good information on there. But one of the interesting things I looked at historically was where are we on this historic journey? What's the kind of parallel? Lots of people go back to 2004, Labour government, etc. But actually, there was a time when GPs were under a lot of pressure. There was not a lot of investment in primary care, and things were turned around. And it was 1966.
Yes.
Most people remember 1966 for very different reasons, but the Family Doctor Charter was 1966. And basically, it was a compact between the government and general practice to build a new system and build lots of new centres and invest in primary care. And I thought historically that was quite an interesting moment to look back at as we now sit here with quite similar challenges. If you read what the challenges are, they're very similar to those today. So we can do it. It has been done before. It's just whether in this policy discussion that we're having, we can actually make it work.
Yeah. Katie?
Thanks.
On to the Nick's point particularly as well, perhaps the evidence point, but again, relatively quickly, if you would.
Yeah, with Nick's point, I completely agree. So our Patients First document describes and actually calls out the lack of attention given by government to, for example, general practice nursing, and the lack of formal qualifications there, the lack of funding, the taking away of fellowships. They've been really sidelined, especially in the additional roles scheme. And now what we're seeing is these roles being brought into ours by the government, but actually that's going to potentially create a two-tier situation where practices don't have the funds to be able to provide the agenda for change contracts, but the ours employed staff will. And that's an inequity which is going to be really, I think, will cause a lot of instability at a practice level. Even with the monies that's being put in, we've still got a global sum of £121.50 per patient per year for unlimited appointments, prescribing, referrals, investigations, results. And I think this is actually it about going back to the Family Doctor Charter, because there's going to be a patient charter in the new contract. And one of the first things I said to Wes Streeting after he was elected was, give us a new Family Doctor Charter from 1965 to 2025. You've got no money, but this will bring you priceless goodwill, because there are loads of GPs that have left partnerships and have left the NHS. They will come back. They will come back. This will cost, but actually everything costs. But where do you get the greatest bang for your buck? You get it in a generalist approach.
Absolutely. Liam?
Excellent. I'm going to quickly take Nish's excellent point about, are we all getting a bit excited here? Is it just that early career GPs will become partners later in their career and this will settle itself down, these trends? I think this is a question of whether it's an age effect or whether there's something that's specific about this cohort coming through that makes them different from previous generations. And just briefly, so I'm 32, a fairly representative age for newly qualified GP. My whole adult life has been sort of shrouded in sort of global economic insecurity. I was 16 during the financial crash, 18 when austerity started, and I think since then we've had a pandemic, a war in Europe, a cost of living crisis. To me, it's... I don't know, we'll speak later. But to me, it's kind of no surprise that the people coming through the system aren't really excited by danger money associated with independent contractor status, right? So
Great.
Maybe we can talk later.
That's a great point. Thank you. So, Becks, you get the last word, and then... Can we put the Mentimeter up again? Is that... And then, Becks, over to you.
Nick, I completely agree with your point about workforce. This is a conversation that, in my view, hasn't really happened, at least in the open, with anyone, but it needs to happen with everybody involved. Naomi, to your point about evidence, I don't think there is much. There is very, very little evidence to help us understand any relationship between ownership models of general practice and outcomes that we're interested in, access, patient satisfaction, whatever it is. There is access on turnover. There is evidence, on turnover, so that is robust. But where it exists, most of the evidence, at least that I'm aware of, is around size of GP practice. So we know, for example, that continuity of care is better in smaller practices, that patient satisfaction is worse in larger practices. But there's obviously a big difference between size of practice and ownership model. So I think there are a set of choices here. Quite a lot of them are in the political realm about what are the principles that government wants to take here to partnership or alternatives to partnership. How quickly does it want to go? How does it want to generate evidence? How does it want to understand what the relationship is between what we think we want, what is the fundamental purpose of general practice, and what are the outcomes we want to deliver it, and then how do we work from there? But I think my final point is I have really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all for participating in it, but this is a conversation that has to be beyond this room. I've never sat in a room like this and heard this discussion happen, but I think it has to echo across our profession, all parts of it, Nick, because that is how we move things forward, and I think we prevent the cliff edge that, here is my plea for the next Mentimeter poll, the withering on the vine approach might eventually lead us to.
Yeah. I don't know if we're able to see the result. Oh.
Oh.
Okay.
Ooh.
Gosh. Wasn't expecting that. Excellent. We've heard some really interesting things. Rather tantalising, social enterprise ideas bubbled up. LLPs from Luke mentioned as an opportunity. Different ways of finding a way to get the benefits of partnership without necessarily some of the risks and things that are putting people off. Not having one national contract. But that also implies probably some significant improvements in the quality of commissioning and contract management, where we've lost quite a lot of the talent and people actually knew how to do this. But so we need to make sure that if we are making a new contract, it is not based on the how do we contract for the people that Rima's worried about, the people who are not performing, but allows the people who are doing really well to do even better, and then perhaps a variety of other mechanisms to solve these problems in a more flexible and less rigid national way, which is a challenge for a national representative body, of course. And
Cheers, Nigel.
You may need to think about that. But thank you to our panel. Thank you to you. We're slightly over, but I hope you'll forgive my 3 minutes transgression. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Brilliant.